The dragon Velsaroth had not moved from his mountain throne in 300 years. His massive body had become part of the stone itself, covered in dust and forgotten memories. Once upon a time, alien civilizations from 12 different star systems used to come here, bowing before him with gifts and treasures. They brought him precious metals that glowed in the dark, crystals that hummed with ancient power, and even bottled starlight from dying suns. They came because they feared him. They came because they worshipped him. They came because that's what you did when you met a dragon. But those days were long gone now. Those great empires had fallen apart, crumbled into cosmic dust. Some of those alien species had evolved into something completely different. Others had simply gone extinct, wiped out by time or war or their own foolishness. The universe had moved on, and it had forgotten about Velsaroth. Nobody came to his mountain anymore. Nobody remembered the ancient dragon who lived there. Dragons don't die from hunger the way other creatures do. They don't just collapse and stop breathing. Instead, they fade away slowly, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Velsaroth could feel it happening to himself. His scales, which once shimmered with colors brighter than any nebula, had turned dull and gray like old ash. His fire, the legendary flame that could melt through starship hulls like butter, had reduced to barely a tiny spark. On a good day, he could maybe light a candle. That's how far he had fallen. But he was still aware of everything. Dragons have senses that go beyond normal sight and hearing. Velsaroth could feel every ship that passed by his dead, forgotten world. He could sense every exploration probe that came to map the lifeless surface of his planet. He felt them all scan the rocks and the empty valleys, mark the planet as uninhabitable, and move on. None of them stopped. None of them even knew he was there. And honestly, Velsaroth had stopped caring a long time ago. He had learned a bitter lesson over his many millennia of existence. Mortals were all the same in the end. They took what they needed and left. They worshipped you when they were afraid, and forgot you the moment they felt safe. They made promises they never kept. They offered tribute until they grew strong enough that they didn't need your protection anymore. Then they disappeared, and you were alone again. Always alone. Velsaroth had decided he was done with mortals. Done with their fear, their worship, their endless demands. He would stay here on this dead rock and fade away in peace. At least that's what he told himself. Then one day, something changed. Velsaroth felt a disturbance in the void above his world. A ship was coming, and it wasn't just passing by. This one was in trouble. He could sense the panic radiating from it like heat from a fire. The engines were failing. The hull was damaged. And it was falling fast, pulled down by his planet's gravity like a stone dropping into water. The ship crashed in the valley below his mountain, tearing up the ground and sending up clouds of dust that Velsaroth could feel even from his cavern. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the ship's doors opened, and they came pouring out. Humans. Velsaroth recognized the species from the genetic memory all dragons carried. Humans were relatively new to the galactic stage, barely a few hundred years into space travel. Young. Weak. Fragile. He could feel their emotions as clearly as if they were shouting them. Terror at being stranded. Desperation to survive. But underneath it all, something else. Something Velsaroth hadn't felt from mortals in a very long time. Hope. These humans actually believed they could fix their broken ship and get off this dead planet. They believed they would survive. Velsaroth watched them through his ancient senses as they set up temporary shelters and started working on their damaged vessel. They moved with purpose and determination. They helped each other without being asked. When one of them fell, others stopped to pick them up. It was strange behavior, almost inefficient. Why waste energy on the weak when survival demanded strength? Still, Velsaroth did not move. He remained perfectly still on his throne, watching but not interfering. He had learned his lesson. These mortals would struggle, maybe succeed, maybe fail. Either way, they had nothing to offer him. The age of worship was over. The age of tribute had ended. He was done expecting anything from mortals, especially ones as young and powerless as humans. He would simply wait here in his darkness until they either fixed their ship and left, or died trying. Either way, it made no difference to him. Or so he thought. 8-year-old Lucy Parker had been told at least a dozen times not to wander away from the colony's temporary shelters. Her mother had said it. Her father had said it. Even Captain Rodriguez had made an announcement over the camp speakers about staying within the safe zone. But Lucy had never been very good at following rules, especially when those rules didn't make sense to her. The mountain called to her. That's the only way she could describe it. Every time she looked up from the dusty valley where their broken ship sat like a wounded bird, she felt something pulling at her heart. It wasn't scary. It was more like when you hear a song from far away and you just have to find out where it's coming from. The mountain glowed sometimes, just a little bit, when the sun hit it at the right angle. Or maybe it glowed on its own. Lucy couldn't quite tell. While all the adults were busy working on the ship's quantum drive, arguing about coolant ratios and power couplings and a bunch of other technical stuff that made Lucy's head hurt, she made her decision. She grabbed her backpack, stuffed her lunch inside, and quietly slipped away from the camp. Nobody noticed. They were all too focused on survival to keep track of one curious kid. The path up the mountain wasn't really a path at all at first. Lucy had to climb over rocks and squeeze through narrow gaps between boulders. But after about 20 minutes of hiking, she found it. An actual path, worn smooth like something had walked on it for thousands of years. And it did glow. Just faintly, like those stars you stick on your ceiling that absorb light during the day. Lucy smiled. She knew she wasn't imagining things. The higher she climbed, the easier the path became. It was almost like the mountain wanted her to reach the top. The air got thinner and she had to stop a few times to catch her breath, but Lucy didn't turn back. She'd come this far. Besides, she could still see the colony's lights down below. She wasn't lost. The cave entrance appeared suddenly, like it had just decided to exist. One moment Lucy was walking around a curve in the mountain, and the next moment there it was. Massive. The opening was so big you could probably fit 3 of their colony ships inside it standing upright. The edges of the entrance were carved with symbols that hurt Lucy's eyes when she tried to look at them directly. They seemed to shift and move, like they existed in more dimensions than her brain could process. Lucy stood at the entrance for a moment, suddenly understanding why her parents had told her not to wander. This was clearly not a place for little girls with backpacks. But she'd come all this way. And honestly, the darkness inside didn't frighten her the way it probably should have. Lucy had been born on a spaceship between stars. She'd spent her first 5 years living in a metal tube surrounded by the infinite black of space. Darkness was normal. Darkness was almost comforting. She pulled out her flashlight and walked inside. The cave swallowed the tiny beam of light like it was nothing. Lucy kept one hand on the wall as she walked deeper, feeling the smooth stone under her fingers. It was warm, which was weird. Everything on this planet was supposed to be cold and dead. The tunnel opened up after a few minutes of walking. Lucy stepped into a chamber so enormous that her flashlight couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. It was like being inside a cathedral, except instead of pews and altars, there were rock formations that looked almost like furniture for giants. And in the center of it all, she saw him. At first, Lucy thought it was just part of the mountain. A natural rock formation that happened to look like something alive. But then she saw it breathe. Just barely, the tiniest rise and fall, like the mountain itself was sleeping. Lucy took a few steps closer, her flashlight beam traveling across what she now realized were scales. Gray scales, enormous ones, each bigger than her entire body. Then the eye opened. Just one eye, slowly, like waking up from the longest sleep in history. The pupil was vertical, like a cat's eye, but it swirled with colors that Lucy had never seen before. Colors that probably didn't have names. It focused on her with an intelligence so ancient and vast that Lucy felt like an ant being studied by a scientist. Most kids would have run screaming. Most adults would have run screaming. But Lucy had always been curious about things that other people found scary. And more than that, she recognized something in that enormous eye. Loneliness. The same kind of loneliness she sometimes felt on the colony ship, surrounded by people but still feeling separate and different. "Hello," Lucy said, because her mother had always taught her to be polite, even to strangers. Especially to strangers. "Are you hungry? You look really hungry." Her voice echoed in the vast chamber, bouncing off walls and coming back to her softer and stranger. The eye blinked. Once. Slowly. And then a voice spoke, not exactly out loud, but somehow directly in Lucy's head. It sounded like rocks grinding together, like thunder rolling across mountains, like the universe itself clearing its throat. Lucy wasn't scared. She had found something wonderful on this dead planet. Something ancient and sad and magnificent. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her lunch, still wrapped in foil, still warm from the thermal pack. She had a feeling this was going to be an interesting afternoon. The dragon stared at the tiny creature standing before him, completely unafraid. In all his thousands upon thousands of years of existence, Velsaroth had encountered hundreds of different species. Warriors who challenged him with weapons. Priests who begged for mercy. Scientists who studied him from a distance. Thieves who tried to steal from his hoard. But never, not once in all those millennia, had anyone simply asked if he was hungry. The question was so absurd, so innocent, that for a moment the ancient dragon didn't know how to respond. "I am a dragon," Velsaroth finally rumbled, his voice shaking loose dust from the ceiling high above. "I do not eat sandwiches." The little human girl tilted her head, completely unbothered by the fact that she was talking to a being that could probably swallow her whole without even noticing. "But you do eat something, right?" She held up what appeared to be food wrapped in some kind of reflective material. "I mean, everything eats. My mom makes really good sandwiches. This one has peanut butter and strawberry jelly. We only have like 6 jars of the jelly left in the whole colony. It's made from real earth strawberries. That's pretty special." Velsaroth wanted to explain to this child that he didn't consume physical food the way mortals did. He fed on worship, on the weight of civilizations bowing before him. He sustained himself on tribute, on the acknowledgement of his supreme power. He needed awe and fear and respect made manifest in offerings of wealth and rare materials. A sandwich made from plant paste was not just inadequate, it was insulting. Except the child didn't mean it as an insult. She genuinely thought she was helping. "You don't understand," Velsaroth said, trying to be patient. "Dragons require more than simple sustenance. We need recognition. Power. The devoted attention of entire worlds." "That sounds really lonely," Lucy said simply. She unwrapped her sandwich, and the smell filled the cavern. It was such a small, ordinary smell. Peanuts. Bread. The sweet scent of fruit preserves. Nothing special. Nothing magical. And yet, Velsaroth found himself noticing it in a way he hadn't noticed anything in decades. Lucy walked closer. She should have been terrified. Velsaroth was easily 100 times her size, possibly more. One of his claws was bigger than her entire body. His teeth could crush starship metal. But she just walked right up to him like he was a neighborhood dog sleeping on a porch. She carefully broke the sandwich in half and placed one piece on a flat rock near his massive head. "There," she said, satisfied with her work. "In case you change your mind. Food always makes me feel better when I'm sad. And you seem really sad." She sat down cross-legged on the cave floor and started eating her half of the sandwich. "I'm Lucy, by the way. Lucy Parker. What's your name? I mean, I can't just keep thinking of you as the giant dragon in the cave. That's not polite." Something impossible happened in that moment. When this small human child offered half her sandwich, one of only 6 precious jars her colony had left, with absolutely no expectation of reward or payment, with no fear in her heart, with no agenda except simple kindness to a stranger who looked hungry, Velsaroth felt something he hadn't experienced in 300 years. It was like a spark of warmth in a body that had gone completely cold. Not worship. Not fear. Not the heavy weight of tribute offered to appease his wrath. This was something entirely different. Something warmer and more genuine. "Velsaroth," he whispered, his voice much softer now, almost gentle. "My name is Velsaroth." "That's a really cool name," Lucy said through a mouthful of sandwich. "Velsaroth. It sounds important. Are there other dragons around here? Or are you the only one?" For the first time in 300 years, Velsaroth moved. It took effort. His muscles had stiffened, his joints had locked. Moving felt like breaking through ice that had frozen solid. But he lowered his enormous head toward the offered sandwich. His nose, which could detect the chemical composition of asteroid fields from light years away, examined the simple food. Bread. Protein paste made from ground legumes. Fruit preserves synthesized from earth plant DNA. Nothing special by any cosmic standard. But it represented something that was special. This child had almost nothing. Her colony was stranded on a dead planet with limited supplies. Every jar of jelly, every loaf of bread, every scrap of food mattered to their survival. And yet she had offered half of hers to him without a second thought. Not because she wanted something from him. Not because she feared him. Simply because she thought he needed it. Velsaroth extended his tongue, just slightly, and tasted the sandwich. The flavor exploded across his senses in a way he couldn't quite explain. It tasted like earth soil and synthetic proteins and careful rationing and a mother's love packed into a lunch. But mostly, it tasted like generosity. Like compassion freely given. Like a child's simple belief that sharing your food with someone who needs it is just what you do. It was the most magnificent thing Velsaroth had ever consumed in his entire ancient existence. "It's good, right?" Lucy said, smiling. "My mom is the best cook on the whole ship." "Well, one of only 3 cooks, but still. She makes everything taste good even when it's just ration packs and recycled protein." Velsaroth finished the half sandwich. He could feel it settling into his vast body, but more than that, he could feel something else changing. The spark of warmth was growing. Not the cold power he'd once wielded over fearful civilizations. This was something that burned hotter and brighter. This was connection. Recognition not of his power, but of his existence. His loneliness acknowledged and answered with simple human kindness. "Why did you come here?" Velsaroth asked. "Were you not told it was dangerous?" Lucy shrugged. "Probably. Adults tell me lots of stuff is dangerous. But you seemed lonely. I know what lonely feels like." Lucy came back the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. Every afternoon, while the adults worked frantically on repairing the colony ship's damaged quantum drive, she would slip away with part of her lunch and climb the mountain to visit Velsaroth. At first, her parents didn't notice. Then they did notice and tried to stop her, but Lucy was stubborn. She told them about the dragon, and of course nobody believed her. They thought she had an imaginary friend, which apparently was normal for kids her age. So they let her go, thinking she was just playing pretend in the caves. Each visit, Lucy brought something different. Sometimes it was half a protein bar. Sometimes it was a handful of dried fruit. Once she brought him soup in a thermos, carefully climbing the mountain path without spilling a drop. And she always talked. She told Velsaroth about Earth, a planet he had never bothered to notice in all his cosmic awareness. She described oceans that covered most of the world, forests with trees that grew for hundreds of years, cities with millions of people all living together. She told him about her grandmother who lived in something called Seattle, and how Lucy had only met her twice before the colony ship left. Velsaroth listened to everything. At first, he told himself he was just bored, that listening to this child was simply something to do after centuries of silence. But that wasn't quite true. He was fascinated. Humans were such strange creatures. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no psychic abilities. They couldn't breathe in different atmospheres or survive in hard vacuum. They were soft and weak and died after barely a century of life. And yet they had built ships that could cross between stars. They explored the universe not to conquer it, but simply to see what was out there. "We're looking for a new home," Lucy explained one day, sitting cross-legged in her usual spot. "Earth is getting really crowded. And some parts aren't safe anymore because of the weather. So lots of people are leaving to start colonies on other planets. My parents signed up because they wanted me to have adventures. They wanted me to see things nobody else has seen. And instead you crashed on a dead world," Velsaroth observed. "Well, yeah. But I found you. That's pretty cool. Nobody else in the colony has met a dragon." Through Lucy, Velsaroth began to understand something about humans that he'd never grasped about other species. Humans had taken the concept of worship and transformed it into something completely different. They didn't bow down to powerful beings out of fear. Instead, they had this bizarre compulsion to care for things. They cared for each other, for creatures weaker than themselves, even for strangers they'd just met. It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. But it was undeniably powerful. One day, Lucy brought friends. 2 other kids from the colony had followed her up the mountain path. A boy named Tyler who was about 10, and his little sister Rosie who couldn't have been more than 5. They were nervous at first, hiding behind Lucy when Velsaroth opened his eyes. But Lucy introduced them proudly, like she was showing off a prize pet, and eventually they came forward with their own offerings. Tyler had brought a chocolate ration bar, which he explained was his favorite food in the whole universe. Rosie had drawn a picture with crayons on actual paper, which he said was a Velsaroth even though it mostly looked like a purple blob with teeth. More children came after that. Then teenagers who were curious about what the kids kept talking about. And finally, adults started making the climb. Not because they believed in dragons necessarily, but because they wanted to see what their children found so fascinating up in that mountain cave. They brought offerings too, but not the kind of tribute Velsaroth had received in ancient times. An engineer named David brought a cookie recipe that had been in his family for 5 generations, printed on actual paper because his grandmother insisted recipes should never be fully digital. A botanist named Rachel brought a tiny potted plant she'd been growing in the ship's hydroponics bay, one of the only living plants they had. A musician brought his guitar and played songs from Earth, filling the cabin with sounds Velsaroth had never heard before. The humans told him stories about their world. They showed him photographs of places they missed. They asked him questions about the universe and actually listened to his answers. They didn't worship him. They didn't fear him. They treated him like a person. Like someone worth knowing. Velsaroth felt himself growing stronger with each visit. His scales began to regain some of their color. His fire burned a little brighter. But this strength was different from what he'd known before. The old power had been cold and vast and isolating. It had been about domination, about inspiring fear and demanding tribute. This new strength felt warm. It pulsed through him like sunlight instead of radiation. It was sustainable in a way the old worship had never been. One evening, Captain Rodriguez herself made the climb. She was a practical woman in her 50s who didn't believe in fairy tales. But when she saw Velsaroth, when she felt the weight of his ancient presence, she understood immediately that this was real. She stood at the entrance to his chamber for a long moment, just taking it all in. Then she walked forward calmly and extended her hand, a human gesture of greeting. "My daughter tells me you've been kind to her," she said. "I wanted to thank you for that. And to apologize if our presence on your world has disturbed you." Velsaroth looked at this human's offered hand. Such a small gesture. Such vulnerability, to reach towards something that could destroy you without effort. But there was no fear in Captain Rodriguez. Just respect. Recognition of him not as a god or a monster, but as a neighbor sharing space on a world. "You have not disturbed me," Velsaroth said quietly. "You have awakened me." It took 3 weeks for the colony's engineers to fully repair the quantum drive. 3 weeks of round-the-clock work, scavenging parts, running diagnostics, and praying to whatever gods they believed in that the repairs would hold for the journey to their actual destination. During those 3 weeks, Velsaroth watched the human colony through both his ancient senses and through the stories Lucy and the others brought him. He learned their routines, their struggles, their small victories. He felt their determination to survive, their care for each other, their absolutely irrational optimism in the face of terrible odds. When the repairs were finally complete, Captain Rodriguez made the climb to his cavern one last time. She came alone this time, which told Velsaroth this was official business. She stood before him with the bearing of someone who'd made difficult decisions before and would make them again. "The ship is ready," she said simply. "We can leave in 2 days. But before we go, I need to have an honest conversation with you. Our long-range scanners detected your energy signature when we first crashed here. We didn't know what it was at the time, but our science team has been analyzing the data. You're putting out enough energy to power a small star. This planet isn't abandoned. It's yours. We've been trespassing." Velsaroth had known the humans could detect him, of course. But he was surprised they'd admit it so directly. Most species would have pretended ignorance, or made excuses, or simply fled without acknowledgement. "We can leave and never come back," Captain Rodriguez continued. "We have enough fuel to reach our original destination. Or, if you're willing, would like to negotiate. This planet has everything we need for a colony. Water ice underground, minerals, stable atmosphere. We could build something here. But only with your permission. I won't have my people settling on someone else's home without their consent." The captain paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I know Lucy has been visiting you. And half the colony has been bringing you things. If that was inappropriate, I apologize. But I want you to know something. If we stay here, if you allow it, we won't worship you. We're not built that way. But we will be good neighbors. We'll share what we have. We'll tell our children about you. We'll remember you're here. That's what humans do." Velsaroth considered her words. A month ago, he would have told them to leave. He would have said he wanted nothing to do with mortals and their brief, chaotic lives. He had spent 300 years learning to be alone, convincing himself that solitude was better than the disappointment that came with connection. But that was before Lucy had shared her sandwich. Before Tyler had given him his favorite chocolate. Before little Rosie had drawn him that terrible, wonderful picture that he'd carefully preserved on a stone shelf. Before David had trusted him with a 5-generation-old family recipe. Before Captain Rodriguez had climbed his mountain to ask permission instead of forgiveness. "I have lived for thousands of your years," Velsaroth said slowly. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched entire species go extinct. For most of that time, mortals came to me out of fear. They brought tribute to appease me, to buy my protection or avoid my wrath. They worshipped me because they were terrified of what I could do to them." He shifted his massive body, feeling strength return to muscles that had been still for so long. "But your species does something different. You don't worship. You befriend. You share not because you're afraid, but because you think it's the right thing to do. You treat ancient dragons like neighbors who might be lonely." Captain Rodriguez smiled slightly. "Is that so strange?" "Yes," Velsaroth said. "Wonderfully, impossibly strange. And I find that I have been hungry for strangeness. He lifted his great head, feeling power flow through him in ways it hadn't for centuries. Stay. Build your colony here. But know this, I am Velsaroth, and I claim guardianship of this world and all who live upon it. Any who would come here to harm you or your children will face my wrath. Any who would threaten this place will learn why dragons were once feared across 100 systems. The captain's smile widened. That sounds like we have a deal. One condition, Velsaroth added. Lucy must continue her visits. And she must bring more of those sandwiches. I have developed a taste for them. The colony grew quickly after that. Prefabricated habitats went up in the valley. Gardens were planted using soil enriched with minerals Velsaroth helped them locate. Children played in the shadow of his mountain, sometimes climbing up to visit, sometimes just waving at the cave entrance. The adults built their lives with the efficiency and determination that humans brought to everything they did. Lucy visited almost every day, even as she got older. She brought her schoolwork sometimes, sitting in the cabin doing math problems while Velsaroth told her stories about civilizations that had fallen before Earth had even formed its continents. She brought her friends, eventually her younger brother when he was born 2 years later. She brought her struggles and her triumphs and her questions about the universe. Other colonists made the climb regularly too. The mountain became a place of community. People went there to think, to talk, to share meals. Velsaroth found himself becoming part of the colony's rhythm. He helped redirect dangerous storms with his weather sense. He warned them about unstable ground before they tried to dig. He shared knowledge from his vast memory when they encountered problems their databases couldn't solve. And slowly, his scales began to shimmer with colors they hadn't held in centuries. Not the cold, distant colors of nebulae and dying stars. These were warmer shades. Earth tones, the humans called them. Browns and golds and deep greens, like forests and fields and the soil where things grew. One night, 5 years after the colony ship had first crashed, Lucy came to visit. She was 13 now, gangly and growing fast, but she still brought sandwiches. She sat in her usual spot and looked at Velsaroth thoughtfully. You know what I realized, she said. You were dying before we came here. Weren't you? You were fading away. Yes, Velsaroth admitted. There was no point in lying to her. But you're not anymore. You're stronger now than when we first met. I can feel it. Yes, he said again. So we saved each other, Lucy said simply. We needed a home. You needed, what? A purpose. I needed, Velsaroth said slowly, to remember that the universe is not empty. I needed to learn that strength does not always come from fear. I needed a child with a sandwich to teach me that the most powerful force in existence is not domination or worship or cosmic power. He looked at Lucy with eyes that swirled with colors she taught him to name. It is connection. It is caring. It is the willingness to share what you have with someone who needs it, expecting nothing in return. Lucy grinned. That's a really complicated way of saying friendship. Yes, Velsaroth agreed. Friendship. And in the valley below, the lights of the human colony glowed warm against the darkness of space, and an ancient dragon who had nearly faded into nothing watched over them all, fed not by worship but by something infinitely more sustaining. By belonging. By purpose. By being remembered not as a god, but as a friend.